Good morning.
Good
Welcome.
morning.
Welcome to Circle Strategies Predictions 8, our podcast with two fantastic professionals in the world of multiculturalism. Today, our podcast is focused on providing some insight into what it's like to navigate two cultures. And we have two Latina women who are both going to provide us some background on their experience of coming to live in the United States and also recognize that this is Hispanic Heritage Month and provide everyone some insight and feedback on their experiences as very successful Latina women. So, welcome, Dulce and Angela. It's great to have you here. Um, why don't we start off with a little bit about your backgrounds, and let's start with Dulce. Tell us a little bit about
Hi, good
you.
morning.
Good morning.
Sure, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate you creating this space. And a little bit about myself. My name is Dulce Orozco. I was born and raised in Venezuela. I am a licensed mental health counselor, and my specialty is working one-on-one with women of color and from immigrant families, and also doing group work with Latinx and families of color. That being said, I have two daughters. They are 6 and 4. And when I think about myself and when I think about Hispanic Heritage Month, I think not only about me as a Latina immigrant, but also me as a Latina immigrant raising first generation daughters, which is another challenge.
Great. Thank you. And Angela, let's hear a little bit about you and some of the work you do.
Great. Thanks so much, Cliff. So I am also born foreign born. I was born in the Dominican Republic to two amazing parents. When I was around 4 years old, we immigrated to New York City. I lived in New York City until I was 18 years old, after which we moved to Massachusetts. And professionally, I think due to the tutelage of my parents and also the surroundings and environments that I immerse myself in, I consistently made like the right choices in life. So, as a professional and also my personal life, I managed to do pretty well with the choices that matter in life, right? Like who's going to be your partner and all these things. So that was, I guess, the core thing of my life, just making right choices. One of those choices was to leave my professional job and start Pixai. Pixai is an AI-powered tool that automatically identifies the top 5 or 6 soft skills most applicable to the job so that recruiters can identify their job candidates a lot better. We are transitioning in human resources to a skills-based type of recruiting, and our platform, we hope to usher that change. So besides working on Pixai 24/7, I'm also very excited about human behavior, data, which is what I work with. And I also enjoy reading, writing, sci-fi movies, cooking, graphic design, and baking.
Cool. You've got a very, very diverse entertainment life. What are some of the things you like to do that's a lot of fun, Dulce?
I know this might sound so cliche, but it fills my heart with joy seeing my daughters laughing and playing and not worrying about life. There's a farm nearby, and they had this it's the first thing, like the first time I've heard of it. It's called a bouncing pillow. So it's like a bouncy house, but I guess that it has a hole in the ground, so it looks a little bit different. And it's for kids, but we went last week, and I asked if I could go on it too. Um, and it was so much fun, right? Like just doing things, jumping around. Of course,
Like
I
being a
got
kid.
tired, and they were jumping there for like 45 minutes. Yes, not having to think and just playing. I also like knitting. I'm not the best knitter, but it's so relaxing for me.
Sure.
I love creative things, drawing, using my hands and seeing results. So a little bit of that.
That's awesome. Great. Well, I think both of you have incredible diverse backgrounds and have had lots of amazing experiences coming to the United States. And that's what we want to focus on today. We want to talk about how we all identify with one's culture or one's ethnicity. And due to us recognizing Hispanic Heritage Month, we want to focus this challenge on how we turn the challenges that you all experienced upside down and look at where we can extract the positives of what it is like to live in the United States as a Hispanic person. So we're real excited about to hear about your feedback, and we have a series of questions. And I'll start off with the questions, and who'd ever like to choose to go first and sharing your feedback, which will get us into a discussion. Go ahead. I'm going to restrain myself from picking who should speak. So the first question has to do with our busy life. We have children. We are navigating the complexities of work. We're navigating the complexities of two worlds, coming from Latino environments. Um, and we want to know, what do we do to feel happy? Uh, when I say happy, it's not about having just this sudden happy emotion. It's about feeling happy with your authentic self. How do you find balance in your day with the work and the children and your life and your own personal experiences, uh, and having time for yourself and balancing all of that along with the cultural differences? So, kind of think of it as a puzzle. And where do you find time for yourself with this big puzzle? And how do you find your authentic self?
Would you like to go first, Lucy, or do you want me to go first?
You can go, Angela.
Okay, great. So thanks for the question, Cliff. I think to have a foundation to this discussion, I think it's really important to identify the different dynamics that we have here going on with the two cultures. One of the key components is the collectivistic nature of the Hispanic culture and the individualistic nature of the American culture. And just briefly to explain to the audience, if these terms are not necessarily clear to you, the collectivistic nature of the Hispanic culture means that there's social rules and focus on promoting selflessness, self-sacrifice, and kind of like the one for all type of a mentality, right? There is an emphasis of working as a group on what's best for the overall society or family, and that focus on, again, family and communities playing a pivotal role in the decision makings in everyday life, right? The nature of the American society is more individualistic. And what does that mean? It means it focuses on the individual. It's pretty kind of like self-explanatory, but the traits that are important here are uniqueness, having that independence or individual freedom, the autonomy of the individual, and self-sufficiency, right? And so if you look at these two ends of the spectrum, you find that as a Hispanic American person, you have to figure out and navigate, okay, when am I doing the one for all, and when am I playing the all for one? You know, like which game am I playing in this kind of situation? So to find harmony in that is where we find the happiness, to your question, Cliff. And for me, I I want I live my life more balancing those two aspects, because I do have to pay attention of, you know, my own individual needs and wants, but I also have to play the collective game too, right? And so my happy place is balancing out these two dichotomies in terms of like, how do I look at the world at any given situation and in any given predicament that I find myself in. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does a lot. And I just one thing I'd like to ask you to just expand on a little bit. When we came up with this question, we did also talk about the differences in the way the Latino community recognizes family and the way the U.S. recognizes family, and how do we handle sacrifice.
That's right.
And
Yeah,
so
different.
it's different, and how the Latino community, when they're in a time of struggle or difficulty or need to make a decision about, am I sacrificing me or am I sacrificing the family, the choices have been different historically. You want to share your perspective?
My perspective on that, Cliff, is that these are all very personal kind of like mindsets and personal takes on any given random situation that we come up in life, right? The way I manage balancing family, there is a element of self-sacrifice that goes into, for example, raising a family, right? Um, it's pretty hard to look after the needs of another individual when you're self-absorbed. Right? So we I look at it more of like, again, that balance. There are times where I have to focus on Angela and what Angela needs, and then there are also times where I have to focus on my family's needs. And so having that balance, and making sure that I check myself, because you know what, Cliff, there are times where it's like work is consuming me, and that work is what Angela needs and wants, right? And so I have to step back and check myself and say, oh, okay, wait a minute. My family, I haven't spoken to my family all day long. Like, I need to make time for this, right?
Right.
So it's, again, that balance and that juggling act. And I think the key is being self-aware, Cliff. And I try to adopt that self-awareness every day. You know, sometimes I fail, but
Mhm.
that's the key, self-awareness.
Great. Yeah, I think there is some differences when it comes to those two different perspectives and sacrifice, and how those two different perspectives approach sacrifice.
How about you, Dulce?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Something fell. Yes, I actually, when I describe my, so I work in individual therapy mostly with women, and when I describe it, I say that I help them to put themselves first, which culturally can be so extremely challenging, right? And I think the main reason, and there's so many reasons, but one of the main reason is exactly what you were talking about when it comes to sacrifices, because many times this is a word that I struggle with, and I use it, and then I'm like, I have a love-hate relationship with the word normalize. But we kind of normalize making all these sacrifices without necessarily having that intentionality behind it. And many of us, we end up paying a very high price, right? From every single category. The way I look at it, of course, I look at it holistically, but it's really hard for me not to look at the price that we pay when it comes to our mental health. And I see that personally, like Angela said, I try to be self aware, but it's not easy. But I also see that with, I would say, all of the people I work with in different degrees, right? But it's definitely something that I would say is a common denominator with the people I work with.
And when you look at the differences, this collectivistic versus this individualistic perspective of the two cultures, um, could you share? You've shared about understanding it and how you've navigated through it, but could you give your perspective on it? And it almost begs the question, which one do you like and which one do you prefer? I'm not asking that,
Mm,
but I
yeah.
just want to understand uh, your perspective on it and how it impacts you as an individual, seeing these two different perspectives. Dulce,
Yeah.
what's your thoughts?
So I'm very rational, right? My brain, like many of us, but I feel that it brings me comfort to have explanations. That being said, because of that reason, I try to be as careful as possible when it comes to using words and when it comes to labeling things. So I've realized that one thing that works for me, it's not to label things as black and white because my brain goes there, right? Like it's this or that. So it helps me to kind of like stay away and really like I try and I feel that I'm constantly trying to look for the grace in between. That being said, something that has helped me a lot is to create space. And I think that comes with this awareness when you think about your growth and when you think about yourself and when you think about being authentic. There's a lot of creating space for what is it that you believe in, right? Not so much that cultural message, or not so much that message that you get from society, from your family, your friends, but do you believe in that? So what I've tried to do is to almost like pick and choose which ones are better from me. And I think that it depends on the days. Like Angela was saying, sometimes I need to think of myself. It's not easy, but some other times I need to go the other way around. It's like a gift, right? To have this different perspectives to choose from. And when I think about my experience as an immigrant, I'm sure that my daughter's experience, and I know from working with many people that are first generation, second generation, it's completely different. But yet having that like almost like alternatives to choose from. But I think that it gets to a point where you don't even like you don't do it consciously. It's part of your options, and it's like, okay, I have this, I have different resources to choose from, if that makes sense.
I think for some of those who are listening in, they would probably be asking, do you have a couple quick little lessons when it comes to it's time for me to get create space? Some maybe two or three that or one or two that really work well for you.
um okay, this is so everything I'm gonna say is a working practice and it's an ongoing process. I wish it could be different, but that's kind of like, what I've discovered. Listen to your body. I feel that many of us, we struggle so much. We don't listen to our bodies until it's a little too late. And listen to what your body's saying when you're overdoing it, when you got that headache and it's like, oh, whatever. Like we give so many excuses, right? And we don't think like, well, maybe it's because I slept 5 hours 4 days in a row. But please listen to your body. That would be number one. Another thing that I don't know if this is like I don't think this is. Maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. Please tell me, Cliff, because I feel this is not so much a sign, like a red flag, but maybe it's more of a tool. But it's can you? Well, I'm gonna backtrack. So I was gonna give you the tool, but I'm gonna backtrack a little bit. Please try to recognize when the self-talk gets really negative, right? And we all have this negative self-talk, but sometimes it gets really ugly. So can you recognize it? Can you recognize when you're being extra mean to yourself, or when what you're telling yourself it's only taking you to dark places? That's another red sign that I've seen in myself and that I've seen in many of the people I work with. Those two, I think, are big ones, and if we work, we can recognize it.
Great. Thank you for sharing that.
So,
I'd
Cliff,
like to. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
no, I'm listening to Dulce here, and I had an aha moment in an airplane. And that aha moment was when the airline hostess say, if there's an emergency, put put your oxygen mask first. If you have children, it doesn't matter who you're with. Put the oxygen mask on your face first.
Yeah.
And I sat there thinking, and it's true. If we don't take care of ourselves,
Hmm.
that individualistic, right, part of who we, of the collective of who we are, then everything else falls apart, because you can't tend to your family, you can't tend to your
Yes.
business, you can't. So again, I said this word, I think, of many times right now. Balance is really the key, where you're understanding when you're catering to yourself because of perhaps the red flags that Dusa just mentioned, right? Or understanding when you're playing, team ball
Hmm.
at the current moment. And I just want to say that a part of what shapes us, and how we view life, a huge component of that for some of us is how we grew up and our family, and the environment that we grew up in, right? So, like, growing up in a Hispanic family, that collectivistic, as you meant, as we were talking about, was huge. Like, there it's almost like there is no self. Like, it's you're focusing on the family's needs, and how we're going to move forward together. um and then as I grew up, Cliff, and Dude said, I had to understand, wait a minute, I want to play the team ball here. I also have to pay attention to myself as well. So yeah, it is a balance of both worlds, and really, I think that's where the healthy, happy, and harmony comes from. A balance.
Exactly. Balance is really important, and creating spaces is really important, and learning how to do that. I think those are two really, really great takeaways. So the next conversation I want to shift to has to do with the word immigrant. And that word is used in so many different contexts today. What I want to hear from you guys is, what does immigrant mean to you?
I'll chime in real quick because my answer is short. Um, I have a real problem with labels, because they just, like, they just paint a picture, and everyone has a different picture of what that means. And so I present myself all the time as Angela Edwards. And if you look at me and I look brown, then that's what I am. If you look at me and I look, a mixture of Asian or whatever the case is, then that's what I am. I mean, people ask me, "Are you Asian?" I'm like, no, but maybe down the stream in the ancestry, maybe I am. Who knows, right? So, being immigrant, to me, it doesn't really have an effect to me, Cliff, to be honest. I am very aware that in the greater culture there is a connotation of what immigrant means. And so I am mindful of that. But for me, it has little to no value because I don't dwell on it at all.
Great. Jose, what do you think about the word immigrant and what does it mean to you?
Yeah, so I would say I'm almost on the other extreme from Angela's answer. I think that it has to do a lot with my identity or how I identify myself. Um, Lately, and this is something I discovered doing my own therapy, but I recognize how my experience as an immigrant has changed over the years. So, briefly, just to give you a little bit of the background, I moved here when I was 17. Not to get too political, but the government in Venezuela had taken over, like at that moment they had like 3 years into power, so the situation wasn't as bad politically. I came because I got a scholarship, I was looking for a better life, like all of that. Fast forwarding until now, most of my family decided to leave Venezuela, like many people in Venezuela are doing right now. And there was this piece of me that always felt like the guilt has been with me all throughout my immigration story, which I feel it's something that many immigrants do experience to several degrees, different degrees. But it got to the point where I found myself almost like justifying or saying, yes, I've been here, but when I came, then it wasn't as bad, or always like explaining why. And it came attached with this guilt of not being able to help my family financially as I would like, or not having enough, like a big enough house to help my family as I would want to, because I was the one that has been outside of Venezuela the longest time, right? And it wasn't until I started talking about this in therapy that I realized that this comparison that was taking place, right, didn't have to exist, or that one immigration story, like the value that that I was attaching to it as suffering more or suffering less, or having an easier or harder immigration experience, that didn't have to be a part of it. And this is a recent discovery. Not to say that, of course, if the reason why you're immigrate is because of a war, of course, like there's every immigration story is different. But I realized that I was attaching value when I thought of the suffering involved. And the reality is that we all have a different immigration story, and we've all struggled in different ways, right? And because of that realization, I was able to say, wait a minute, I might not have the house that I want or the financial needs that I would need to help my whole family, but I have accomplished a lot, and I'm proud of what I have accomplished. So it's that back and forth. Speaking about that balance, right, that Angela was referring to. So I don't know if this is a good answer to your question, Cliff, but it's a recent realization about all these different categories and attachments that I was bringing. And it's the emotion that I was putting into the word, right?
And when I hear your story and your explanation of how you came to realize that how you were looking at yourself as an immigrant has shifted, the words that come to my mind is the value that you put on the immigration or your transfer is within.
Absolutely.
It's
Yes.
it's
And that
within.
can change.
It
That can
doesn't
change
matter
over the years because
what's
you
happening on the
changed.
outside. Exactly.
Yes. Yeah, so going back to what our previous question, my mantra for Hispanic Heritage Month and the way I've for my speaking engagements, I try to start out with a breathing exercise, a brief meditation exercise, and I've used the mantra, everything is always changing and I'm changing too, because I feel that means
I like that.
reminder, right? I need it myself. So but it's that, right? Like I'm changing, I'm not the same person that I was when I was 17 years ago, when I was 17 years old, right? But absolutely, yeah. So yeah.
That sounds great.
Angela, you wanted to say something?
I
Yeah.
just have to make a commentary as an observer here. That's a powerful, if anyone walks away with anything in this discussion, it has to be that. Because, it's like the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right?
Yeah,
So
that's negative.
yeah, so like that inner processing, right? And how we view ourselves as whatever the labels that society has, right? Like that's super, super key in our own happiness and balance within. And so thank you, Dulce, for
Yeah,
saying
that
that,
was
because
wonderful. That was really wonderful. Thank you.
that is precisely why, guys, very early on, I suspended like labeling myself certain things.
Mhm.
Because if you zoom out and look at society and how, for example, Black and brown women are viewed, right? Then it's like, oh my gosh, the statistics are against me. Like I'm going nowhere fast, right? I don't pay attention to any of that, and I don't adhere to any of it because I know my worth and I know where I'm going and my trajectory, and so I'm not going to subscribe to that.
Yeah, because it can be derailing and very difficult to manage. So yeah, definitely. Another terminology that a lot of people are talking about, or there's been lots of discussion about it, is code switching. And it's a terminology that I don't know for sure it's become more mainstream in the dialogue of individuals today. So for those on who are viewing today who've never heard of it before, maybe give us a brief description about it. But there is a shift, it seems, from our previous discussions, in that how code switching was uh, recognized previously has shifted. So share with us a little bit, either one, about what does code switching mean, and how should somebody understand what it means.
You want to go first, Dulce, or okay?
You
I
can go, Angela. I was
okay,
struggling with my unmute button, sorry.
okay, no worries. From my understanding, Cliff, code switching is what people do when they have to adhere to different environments, different types of cultures or ethnicities or backgrounds, right? So, for example, if I am an Asian man, right, I act differently as an Asian man within my own family, and within my own peers, Asian males and females, than if I leave that environment and I go to, let's say, an office space where it's predominantly Caucasian, let's say, as an example, right? So it's like the individual feels the need to kind of like change certain personalities of themselves to appease to their environment. That's my understanding of it.
Yes.
And so for me, I'll add this much for me, Cliff and Dulce. again, it comes back to how we view things. If we're operating from a more victimized point of view, then code switching is a problem. It's not fair that as a woman, I have to, do this in this manner. And when I'm in this other environment, I have to shift here. It's
Mm-hmm.
not fair that as a Hispanic person, I act this way with my family. And when I'm in the office or when I'm in a professional setting, I have to act this other way. That kind of like those thoughts and mentality, they're more coming from a position of you're at a disadvantage, right?
Mm-hmm.
For me, the way I look at it and the way I operate is I have to be aware of my surroundings. If I like to talk Spanglish, which alguna veces me gusta hacer, I'm not going to do that in a professional environment where no one knows Spanish. It makes no sense, right?
Right.
So um, it's I see it more as an empowered position where I am aware of my environment and I am aware of the likes and dislikes of the audience around me, and I act accordingly.
Great. And Dulce, tell us how you think code switching has been shifting today. If you see, if maybe you don't see a shift, but um, how do you perceive it today and how it's recognized in today's society?
Yeah, so it seems that so many of us, the way I see it, with many of the clients I work with in my personal life, with myself, it happens so quickly. Like it happens, I think it's also our default, right? And we don't realize it. Um, and I also, I love what Angela said, mentioning the victimhood, which I see, right? I have, um, unfortunately, this continues to happen. I hear people saying how they were treated a certain way when there were comments about them speaking Spanish in their workplaces. But at the same time, it can almost be like a superpower, right? To be able to do that. And going back to our first question when we were talking about the collective nature of the Latina culture versus the individualistic nature of the American culture, and having to choose and which one is better. I think that coaching, it's we could almost think of it the same way, where you can do it, you can adapt it, you can think about what works for you, what you need. I had this friend. She doesn't speak Spanish, and whenever we were doing, meetings, I have two daughters, so I don't know. One needed to use the bathroom, the other one, like all the things that happens when you're in the middle of a meeting that hasn't happened all week, like all day long, usually. And she would tell me like, Dulce, I love that you do that, that like you're so into the zone, you're speaking English, you're talking whatever it is, and then you turn around and you talk to your daughters and you turn into this Latina mom, like, and this is what your clients need to see, right? Like this is how you can do marketing, this is how you can like, and I was like, what do you mean? That's who I am. Right? Like it took me a while to see, and I think like, like I'm not quite able to see it the same way that she sees it, because she was asking me like, how do you do it? And I was like, what do you mean? Right? Like, but I feel
This
that
is how I
through
function.
code switch, yes, it was like, yeah, like this is like I need to tell her to whatever it is, right? But yeah, and that gave me a whole new perspective into how other people perceive it versus how it feels like and how it is like for me. I do think that when it gets to the point where you think, wait a minute, like I need to do something to protect myself, that's a red flag, right? That's another thing that happens. But yeah, it was very interesting to get that feedback from her.
A little perspective on me. Obviously, this program is all about you, but I think I'd like to just share a little bit about me and how I had a slightly different experience than you folks when it comes to code switching. I'm originally from South Africa, and I came here as a, a middle schooler, I guess, high schooler. And in high school, it's all about fitting in and trying to not be different, because when you're the slightest bit different, you absolutely have, um, you stick out, right? So, from my perspective, I tried to do everything I possibly could do to not be different. And I came to this country with a very strong accent. While I spoke English, I had a very, very, very uh, different experience. And I did everything I could, or if I tried to do everything I could to sound like an American and act like an American. And that I never questioned it. I just said, that's what I'm going to be doing. And I think that's a slightly different perspective to want to do. And I apologize. I'm trying to turn off my beeping. I'm not sure what's happening here. So I guess what I would like to say about that specifically is um, I did it to blend in, and not because I needed um, to do it to protect myself. And as an adult now, and I have changed, and many times people who meet me and hear that I'm from South Africa say, "Oh, you don't have an accent at all." Um, I have come to realize that I'm glad I gave it up, because it was an accent that we all did talk about, that it was a hard accent, and there was this understanding that you know it's guttural, it's abrasive, it's not soft, and people love it and some people don't. And I didn't give it up because I hated it, but I came to have a different perspective about it. So that's my story, in that how my code switching was a little of a different experience.
That's
So
wonderful, Cliff. Thanks for sharing that.
yeah.
One of the things that is really important in you communicating that story is the fact that, from your perspective, it was the right thing to do, and you found harmony in that process, right?
Yes.
I think when with other individuals, where it goes a little off is that they don't necessarily feel comfortable with it,
Hmm.
because maybe as on the contrary, maybe they love their homeland, and maybe they love the way they express themselves, right? And then feeling the need to have this shift for them is like, oh, like this is hard to do.
Yes.
And then therefore you start creating these, almost like negative connotations, right? Um,
Yeah, it
Hmm.
is different.
There's
And
something I
then,
would, oh,
yeah, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
sorry, Cliff, but there's something I would like to add because I feel that it's part of what you both said. So, like I told you, I work a lot with first generation, second generation Latinas, Latinos, Latinx, and something that I've been hearing a lot lately, and I wonder, like if this is a conversation that we're getting more into now because we're seeing those generations, or if this is a conversation that is has always been there, but it's more out right now. Like I question, like I wonder that. But it's the fact you mentioned something, and you mentioned the need to blend in, even like perhaps at that moment you were not able to quite see it. Right now, like you're able to recognize it. Maybe you were able to recognize it then. But what I hear is, Dulce, my name is Maria Garcia, right? And I'm ashamed of not speaking Spanish. And I talked to my parents, grandparents about it, and the answer is it wasn't safe. We needed to blend in at that moment. It's not what people
Yeah.
were doing. And
Right.
now, it's almost like this shame, really, about not speaking Spanish and the assumptions, like going back to the labeling, right? That
Right.
many people have when they see you, when they hear your name. So it's almost like a bit like putting those two pieces together, right? Like the need to blend in when it's for like many different reasons, and not to go into like those reasons, but as Angela was saying, that feeling of, well, it brings me peace, it brings me, or the opposite, which
Right.
is what I'm seeing with a lot of these people, right, that feel judged, that feel like many of them has even told me like that people tell them, I know you speak Spanish, why don't you, like, it's almost like this. Yeah, so it's very interesting.
And I had some of those similar feelings in high school and in college.
Mm.
Like, I just wanted to blend in. Like, stop asking me about these questions.
Yes.
It's just like, just let me be like you. But anyway, we could spend a lot of time talking about that. We're getting close to the end, and I thought I'd like to end off the conversation, bringing it back to what we started talking about with, and that was navigating the two cultures and how complex and how much we have to balance. And so I'd like to end with hearing from you. Uh, if you could share some of your best and most successful coping mechanisms, how do you bring balance and how do you find space? But if you could just share some of the things for people who are listening who have experienced, there's probably many people who have experienced what you've experienced. And if you could just share, one or a couple coping mechanisms that brought you back to a place where you felt comfortable and you were able to get space, or it was able you were able to get through it if it was a difficult time, that would be great.
Um,
For me, it's been, you want to start, Angela?
no, go
No,
ahead.
no, you go ahead.
So for me, it's been one of the things I realized that can happen with having these conversations when looking into these topics is difficult it can be, how painful it can be, right? This can be, the way I am very visual, so I think about these metaphors. Some of them work, some of them do not work. But it almost feels like you're like mixing this huge pot of different things. And some of them might be really hard to see and to recognize. And there might be blame, there might be anger, right? We were talking about that for like the example of speaking the language, not speaking the language. But I feel that compassion and self-compassion are, I don't like to call them coping mechanisms, because it
Mhm.
feels that somehow for me that is linked to something, like I need to, like I'm going through something, which is true. But again, going back to how I rationalize things, I like to call them tools or resources. So I feel that having compassion for those people that are part of whatever it is that you're going through, knowing that they were doing their best with the resources they had at the time, but most importantly, having self compassion, which is something, again, that I did not know growing up, has been life changing for me. And it's something that I really try to incorporate with the people I work with. Also, therapy for me has been this space where I can talk about a lot of these things. My therapist is also Latina, it's also an immigrant. Not to say that someone else wouldn't see it that way, but I know that for me personally, that is what has worked the best. I've had white therapists in the past, and that hasn't worked as good as having someone I feel can understand me culturally in that sense. And also knowing that it changes, right? For me, this whole thing took a whole different perspective after having my daughters. I feel that before having my daughters, I identified myself more as an international student. And I was okay with that for the longest time. And it was like this limbo place where, but then I had my daughters and it was like, well, I want to tell them things. And in order for me to tell them things, I need to feel comfortable. And I
Yes.
know that it's changing constantly. That's why my mantra, I don't know, like I'm like a little fixating on my mantras, you can tell. But yeah, I would say self-compassion has been the go-to resource for me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's pretty awesome, Dulce, because you answered 90% of what I was going to say. Yes. So having a very, very strong sense of self is very important. I mentioned labels a lot here. And the reason why I don't adhere to labels is because for me, it could be different for anyone else, but for me, not identifying with labels gives me a peace of mind. Like I don't have to assume any of those roles because I know who Angela is, and I know what I'm about, and I know what I bring to the table. So I don't need to play that game. So that's number one, my first coping mechanism, having a strong sense of self. The second is self-compassion, as Dulce mentioned. Self-compassion is huge. I only learned this, I want to say the past maybe 5 years or so. And by 5 years, meaning it's a developing practice. It's not mastered. Um, because I think the greater society as a whole, even some aspects of your family, if you have those dynamics going on, they put a lot of pressure on you. Even your self-talk is a lot of times toxic. Like, oh, you stupid, you didn't do this right, or you whatever. Stop. Self-compassion. You have a right to be, to not be right. You have a right to not be, accurate, and it's okay. So that's the second coping mechanism. And the third, which is also a developing practice that I have not mastered yet, is the art of spirituality, whatever that means to you. It could be, sitting in a nice tub filled with, bubbles and listening to relaxing music. It could be a meditation. It could be a walk, a nice, relaxing walk, brisk walk, whatever that means to you. Just finding the actions that bring you back to center and that relaxes you is super important. And so those are my three coping mechanisms.
That's great. I think this is a great conversation, and I think I'd like to feel that a lot of what you have said applies to many cultures today and many individuals who have left their homeland and come to the United States or gone to another homeland. There is always that difficulty of navigating the two cultures and what you have to do and how complex it is. And then you layer on top of that the complexities of life. And the complexities of life have increased significantly when you look at what life was like in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. So this was really great, really inspirational. Thank you both for giving us your personal input, and I hope a lot of the viewers were able to take away some great nuggets of advice. So
Thank
thank
you,
you,
Cliff,
Angela.
for providing the platform. And thank you, Dulce, for your insights as a professional. Really, really extracted a lot of value from what you said.
Great. Well, we're
Thank
getting
you. We
some.
need to have this conversation, so thank you.
Thank you. Yes, and Nilifer's actually putting up some information about feedback we're getting from people directly who are participating live. So thank you for providing that feedback. Well, I wish you all a great rest of the day, and look forward to chatting with you guys again in the future. So thanks again.
And happy Hispanic Heritage Month.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, guys. Thanks.
Bye.